The Breaking Bad universe turns morality on its head. Almost every character is morally ambiguous. So in this universe, do you consider Chuck McGill a good person? The answer to this question really hinges on your belief about Jimmy. Was he always just destined to hurt everyone around him, or could he have chosen a different path if society forgave him for his past mistakes and welcomed him back into the fold? When I look at the two brothers' legal philosophies, really they both represent two opposing sides of every trial. Jimmy is the defense, as he understands criminals and wants to protect them from the system. And Chuck is the prosecution, wanting to protect society by locking the trespassers away. This feeds into a larger question about what the purpose of the law, punishment, and prison even is. Is it supposed to rehabilitate criminals so that they won't reoffend, or just a method of casting them aside, a way to signal to the rest of society that they're bad apples that should never be trusted? Chuck dedicated his life to the law, and not only does he believe he's doing what's right, he tends to be proven right over and over again throughout Better Call Saul. So let's take a deeper look at the alleged morality of Charles McGill to see if we can determine whether or not, on balance, he's a good person. And just a quick reminder to push the like, subscribe, and notification bell, as it appears the YouTube gods are currently suppressing me. We'll start with his personal philosophy.
It's mankind's greatest achievement. The rule of law, the idea that no matter who you are, your actions have consequences.
Chuck believes that the law is sacred and considers it to be synonymous with morality. If you do good and act in accordance with the public's well-being, then good things will happen to you. But if you break the rules out of self-interest, then you've done wrong and deserve the punishment that awaits. For Chuck, the law isn't just a rule book, it's a set of moral principles to live by. This allows him to feel that he's not just a good person for following it, but better than everyone else because he works on its behalf. The world then reinforces this belief by rewarding him at every turn. Unlike his younger brother, Charles went straight to college and followed this righteous path straight to the top, where he's achieved both financial success and professional prestige. So he's never had any reason to doubt the system, which conveniently encourages him to never doubt himself. Whereas Jimmy just views the law as a game that some people are better at playing than others. He believes no one is all good or all bad. It's a spectrum largely based on perspective, and every system can and will be corrupted. Chuck despises Jimmy's morally flexible worldview, where the ends justify the means. As to him, everything is black and white. There is right and there is wrong. And of course, Chuck is always right.
I know you know I'm right. You know I'm right.
When Jimmy is struggling to make ends meet, Chuck expresses his belief in the system by stating, "There are no shortcuts, do good work and the clients will come." Which on some level is true. The more value we can provide for others, the more likely we are to succeed in any domain in life, as humans are largely self-interested. Therefore, if you work in their favor, they'll reward you in the same way you've rewarded them. But each individual is dealt a different hand to play, and at various points in our lives, we may find ourselves in a lucky position of privilege or boxed into more challenging circumstances than those around us. And it's in these moments that our morality is really revealed. And this is Chuck's key blind spot. He doesn't recognize that it's easy to be moral if everything is working in your favor, and you have no need to bend or break the rules, as you're then incentivized to maximize your self-interest by doing things by the book. Whereas others aren't so lucky, and their incentives line up differently. And as long as their incentives are inverted, then they're more likely to remain on a more destructive path. In essence, when it comes to the nature-nurture debate, Chuck believes in nature. To him, people are born good or born bad, and that will be revealed to the rest of society based on their decisions. This is why when Jimmy ends up arrested, Chuck now believes that, as a lawyer, he has a larger duty to the world to protect them from his own brother than he has to helping his own brother so that he can be incentivized to do good. Therefore, he limits and restrains Jimmy in every way he can. Yes, he technically helped him by bailing him out of jail, but he then kept him in a prison of his own making by cutting off his ability to evolve in a more honest direction. So you see, by treating Jimmy as if he's no good and can never be trusted, he's disincentivizing him to remain on that path, as no matter what he does, he can't progress. He's stuck still. Interestingly, we see this same theme get expressed in a different way when it comes to Chuck's mental illness. In the first season, the doctor confronts Jimmy about whether bringing supplies to Chuck's house is helping him or enabling him. And again, we see the difference between the two brothers. Chuck tries to be cruel to be kind, making sure he doesn't enable Jimmy's worst impulses by giving him bigger opportunities to do harm. Whereas when it comes to his alleged condition, Jimmy allows Chuck to lean into his worst instincts. He's being so kind that he's enabling his brother to slowly destroy himself. So a key difference is that Chuck trusts himself to say, "I know what's best for you," whereas Jimmy would never impose that moral assumption on anyone, as he's experienced a harsher reality than his brother. But then who's really a better person? Someone who's grappled with their morality and is aware of their fallibility, or someone who's never been forced to question themselves and therefore believes they're always right?
They deserve a vigorous defense like any other client.
Of course, Chuck echoes the words in his rulebook, that everyone deserves a proper defense no matter who they are. But does he really believe that when we look at his actions? For instance, has he ever really sided with Jimmy? Or was it one strike and you're out from the moment he even suspected he stole money from his father's till? In fact, let's start there. While Chuck was away studying at university, Jimmy began working in his father's convenience store. The store ran into financial trouble, so Chuck was trusted with the responsibility of going over the books. He soon discovered that $14,000 was missing, just gone. He then assumed that it was all stolen by Jimmy in dribs and drabs. Therefore, Chuck blames Jimmy for the death of his father, as he passed away soon after his store was forced to close. But like always, there's more to the story than meets the eye. Chuck is not wrong that Jimmy pocketed some money from the till. We see him do that. But $14,000 worth? Probably not, as we also see that their father is easily fooled and offers help and even money to anyone who needs it. So due to his grief, Chuck is morally prosecuting his brother without a vigorous defense and without even a full picture of all the evidence. He just needed someone to blame to make himself feel better and resented the fact that no one else ever even suspected their Jimmy. Just like the legal system, Chuck likes to judge and categorize people as guilty or innocent. But once they are labeled, that reputation sticks and corrupts other people's view of them. Chuck considers himself a clear-minded and unbiased judge who's just following the evidence, but his emotions guide him in certain directions and cause him to prioritize certain pieces of evidence over others. For example, for someone as competitive and righteous as Chuck, he resents the fact that interpersonally, people prefer Jimmy. Even his ex-wife would belly laugh at Jimmy's jokes, and then when he attempts to make a similar joke later, it doesn't land. People admire Chuck's intellect, but they don't really connect with him as a human being, because he's quite difficult and egotistical. This makes Chuck jealous of what Jimmy has, as he sees it as undeserved. For example, when their mother is on her deathbed and the two brothers have been waiting by her side for days, Jimmy finally gives in to his hunger and decides to go for a sandwich. But Chuck is focused on the task at hand and remains by her side. While he's absent, their mother finally wakes, and the only person she calls for is Jimmy, before she passes away. So even though Chuck did do the honorable thing, he doesn't get any credit for it, as that's not what people value the most. She wanted Jimmy by her side, not him. But then when Jimmy returns and discovers her hospital room is empty, he asks Chuck what happened. Did she wake up? Did she say anything? And rather than telling Jimmy she called out for you, he says no. Now, there are two ways of interpreting this decision. The first is that Chuck is bitter that his mother didn't call for him, and he doesn't want Jimmy to have the satisfaction of knowing he was the favorite. The second is that Chuck is telling a white lie to protect Jimmy from feeling guilty about the fact he abandoned his mother in her time of need. So he won't dwell on the fact by selfishly leaving to go have his sandwich, he made her final few seconds on this earth lonelier than they needed to be. So you can view his decision either way, And there's no doubt that Chuck would tell himself the second story, as that makes him appear like a better person. But to the outside observer, his motivation seems closer to the first story. And if honesty and doing things by the book is Chuck's alleged priority, then is he not morally obligated to abide by the truth instead of hiding it? Despite what Chuck believes, legal is not always synonymous with moral. You can abide by the rules while still being a shitty person. Jimmy is a test of what Chuck values more, his loyalty to his brother or his loyalty to his profession. And Chuck always tries to have it both ways. He wants to keep Jimmy on side while stabbing him in the back. So for a man who proudly states that the law is sacred because it ensures that actions have consequences, he often tries to insulate himself from his own. For instance, when Jimmy passes the bar and hopes to get a job in Chuck's firm, he makes Howard do his dirty work for him by shutting down his brother's dreams of ever working at HHM. And he does the same thing later with the Sandpiper case that Jimmy worked so hard to get. Once he sees how big the case could be, he takes it to his own firm instead and has Howard cut Jimmy out of it. Now, given how poorly Jimmy later performs when he works at Davis & Main, you could argue that Chuck is actually protecting the industry he values the most from Jimmy's self-interest. However, given the only thing Chuck has is his professional reputation and how he didn't even want Jimmy advertising his services under the name McGill, it's more likely he's just trying to preserve his own honourable stature than anything else. So he tells himself it's for the collective good, but his real motivation is his own self-interest. This is why he takes Jimmy doctoring the Mesa Verde address so personally, as he can't believe his own brother would try to sabotage his career, while never recognizing that he's been doing the same thing to Jimmy all along. Again, this is because in Chuck's mind, he was born good and Jimmy was born bad, so therefore his sabotage, no matter how hypocritical, is completely justified. Except Chuck doesn't just try to sabotage Jimmy's career, he tries to sabotage his personal relationships too, like with Kim. Although he probably believes he's heroically saving her career by coercing her to not associate with Slip and Jimmy, by doing so, he's trying to punish and isolate his brother so that he can never succeed in any domain in life.
Because if I were impeding the career of one of my employees for the purpose of compelling you to do something against your will, that would be extortion.
And extortion is a felony, so he would never say that. But even if he would never say it, consciously or unconsciously, he is trying to do it. He wants it. He's disincentivizing Kim from helping Jimmy by having Howard stick her in doc review as punishment for his bad behavior. Now maybe Howard did this all on his own, but Chuck's fingerprints are all over this decision. Obviously, he wants Jimmy to quit the law. That's why he's blocking him at every turn and trying to destroy his relationships. So he may be technically obeying the letter of the law by not saying it, but he's only deceiving himself that this is not, at the very least, a social crime he is committing. And for a man who allegedly believes that the law is sacred, we can see that he's not above weaponizing it to manipulate the outcomes he personally wants. This makes it not about what's right or wrong, but his own self-interest. For example, when he steals his neighbor's newspaper without their consent, even though he leaves $5 as payment, once the police show up to confront him, he defends himself using probable cause to cover his own ass. So even though he's technically just broken his sacred law, Chuck wants people to fear the repercussions of a lawyer of his stature making their life hell. This way he evades punishment. But by his own principles, does that somehow make the action more moral, just because he can pull the right levers to get out of it? Chuck knows people fear the law. That's why he uses it to intimidate them. Like when he tries to bully the photocopy guy into telling him what he needs to hear.
Son, listen carefully. I am an officer of the court investigating a felony.
So you're a cop?
No.
Time and time again, we see him berate Jimmy for thinking that the ends justify the means. But in this endless pursuit of the truth, there is no low Chuck will not stoop to, as long as it's just about within the confines of the law. He emotionally manipulates his own brother into confessing to fraud while secretly recording him, then exploits the fact that Ernesto prefers Jimmy more than him to leak the information, thus manufacturing the exact circumstances in which Jimmy is likely to explode so that he can have the exact number of witnesses present to legally press charges and have his license revoked. Now, on the one hand, Jimmy is guilty of the original crime of doctoring the documents, but without even fully knowing that he's guilty, Chuck is willing to commit entrapment here. And then when his actions have consequences, that due to his unstable appearance at the disciplinary hearing, the malpractice insurance company no longer want to insure him, what does Chuck do? He threatens litigation.
What will happen is very simple. You're going to do right by us, or we will compel you to do so.
If you're threatening litigation, I'm afraid this meeting is over.
Then it's over.
Now, does this sound like the proper use of the law to you, scaring others into compliance? Or does this make him no better than any criminal coercing others into silence? And then finally, when Howard suggests maybe it's time he retires, Chuck threatens to sue HHM for breach of contract, unless they can buy him out, knowing that it risks bankrupting the entire company. So yes, Chuck might think of himself as a good person, but the moment he faces any real adversity, or true moral test from a position of weakness, he reveals his true values: predictable self-interest. But does this make Chuck's self-righteousness unearned? Is he therefore just as bad as anyone else, given the right set of circumstances? You can decide for yourself. But to me, based on his actions throughout Better Call Saul, on balance, Chuck is still a more honest and decent person than Jimmy. He may not be as likable, fun, loyal, or personable, but he's not a force for evil, as he does have some moral code he lives by, and certain lines he will not cross. However, his perception of reality is clearly flawed. We see this in how absolutely dead set he is in his belief that he's allergic to electricity. And if he could be so wrong about that, who's to say he wasn't also wrong about Jimmy all along? If he could tragically let his false perception of his own illness destroy his life, maybe his false perception of his own brother managed to destroy his too. And although he would never get involved in the criminal underworld Jimmy was pulled into, Better Call Saul leaves us with an interesting moral question about culpability. Who should we condemn more? The one who gets led astray, or the one who shut down every other direction so they had nowhere else to go? So if you made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching. But if you could now click like, subscribe, and the notification bell, as otherwise that pesky algorithm will continue to suppress my videos from your feed.